Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another recording within the ISQM webcast series. I am Lynette, Roeloffze, Senior Manager within Quality and Risk Management at Mazars. Today we will be focusing on the risk assessment process within ISQM1. It is actually the second component of the 8 components contained within this ED. If we look at the House of Quality Management, the risk assessment process falls within the structure or the frame of that house. So it's basically there to support and facilitate the quality management process of the firm individually, but also of the firm's engagements. If we go into specifically risk assessment process, let's ask ourselves why the need for a risk assessment process. If one goes back to the invitation to comment process, it became very clear that there were certain key public interest issues that this risk assessment process now addresses. Specifically, the fostering of an appropriately independent and challenging skeptical mind. And secondly, encouraging proactive quality management at both the firm and an engagement level. Further also, this whole process is a risk-based approach, which also now for us as auditors means that we can now focus on proactively identifying and responding to risks that may have an impact on engagement quality. It further facilitates a proactive response by the firm to changing circumstances and proactively managing or mitigating risk. And lastly, it also provides a level of assurance. Then also, it is based on the nature and circumstances of the firm and the firm's individual engagements. And lastly, it is there to promote continual improvement and responsiveness. Like with anything, a system like the risk assessment process does have some limitations, which is because as a result of us providing reasonable assurance and not absolute assurance. That acknowledges that limitations exist in all systems of quality management and that uncertainties and risk may exist that we cannot predict. So there is a limitation that not all quality risks can be identified, and secondly also that not all identified quality risks can be responded to. If we look at an overview of the changes from the extant ISQC1 towards the risk assessment process, it is specifically focused on the fact that unlike extant ISQC1, ISQM1 specifically focuses on the principle of professional judgment. It explicitly requires the firm to exercise professional judgment in applying the requirements of the standard. Doing so is necessary so that a firm's system of quality management is appropriately tailored to the nature and circumstances of the firm and the engagement it performs. The need to exercise professional judgment is reinforced throughout the standard, and the definition of professional judgment has now been introduced. If you refer to, for example, paragraph 7, 8, 19 and 22 of this ED. It is also an integrated risk approach to address standalone elements to an integrated risk approach that reflects upon the system as a whole. And lastly, the focus is now on quality risks at both a firm and an engagement level. The new approach requires a firm to customize the design, implementation and operation of its systems of quality management based on the nature and circumstances of the firm and the engagements it's performed. So now let's go into the detail of the risk assessment process. The risk assessment process as contained in ISQM1 contains 3 steps. Firstly, it is to establish quality objectives. Secondly, it is to identify and assess quality risks. And the third and last step is to design and implement responses. In general or overall, a risk-based approach supports the firm in focusing its efforts and resources on areas where they are needed the most. So if we go into the detail of the first step, being to establish quality objectives, the definition as contained in the ED states that the definition of this is that the objectives that when achieved by the firm collectively provide the firm with reasonable assurance that the objectives of the system of quality management are achieved. If one refers specifically to paragraph 26 of the ED, it states that there is a requirement to identify and document quality objectives required specifically by the standard. Reference there are made to paragraphs 23, 32, 34, 36, 38, 40 and 42 of the standard. If you are a bean counter like me, you would have now seen that it contains the 7 components. So there's a requirement that a quality objective needs to be identified by the firm for each of the other 7 components, hence the reference to those various paragraphs. Secondly, also, the standard then proposes that one identifies as a firm additional quality objectives that are specific to your firm and the engagements that you perform, hence the tailoring within that quality management process. Then secondly, your step is to identify and assess quality risks. Now, for me, it's very important to note that the whole process of risk assessment is very much the same as what we have within ISA 315, which is to identify and assess risks. So basically what we have been doing as auditors all along, we can now apply within this process. If we go on to the second step within the risk assessment process, it is to identify and assess quality risks. Here it is important for me to note that the principles contained within the risk assessment process are very similar to the principles contained within ISA 315. So what we have been doing as auditors within identifying and assessing risks as part of our audit is exactly what we are doing as part of our risk assessment process within quality management. Again, let's look at the definition contained in the ED. Quality risks are risks arising from conditions, events, circumstances, actions or inactions that may adversely affect the achievement of a quality objective. So within that, we have to do 2 things. We first have to identify the quality risk, and once identified, we have to assess it. In identifying the quality risks, we need to look at what within our quality management system and what within our firm and our engagements are going to have a reasonable possibility of occurring. And secondly, if they were to occur, may individually or in combination with other quality risks have a significant effect on the achievement of a quality objective. Specifically here, referring to paragraph 28 of the ED. Then once we've identified those quality risks, only those quality risks that we've assessed to be both have a higher likelihood of occurring, as well as having a significant effect or impact on the quality objectives, will be then further included in our risk assessment process. Reference to paragraph 29 of the ED. A very nice summary of the whole identifying and assessing of quality risk process is this schematic presentation that is contained in the explanatory memo to ISQM 1. If we go to it in a little bit more detail, we'll see on the left-hand side, you have step 1, identifying the quality risks. In asking yourself that question and in identifying the quality risk, you have to look at the whole population. You will have to look at the risks not only contained just in your firm, but also on an individual engagement level, be it an audit, be it a review engagement, be it a compilation of a financial statement. So once you have looked at the whole population and identified those risks or potential risks, you need to ask yourself the following question. Does this specific risk have a reasonable possibility of occurring? If the answer is yes, your second question would be, would the quality risk that you've identified individually or together with other quality risks have a significant effect on the achievement of your quality objectives? If your answer again is yes, then you will go down into the second step of this part of the risk assessment process, whereby you will now assess those specific quality risks. If the answer to any of these questions is no, there is no required further action. In terms of step 2, once you get to assessing those risks, it is important that you focus that assessment on the quality risk and to provide a basis for the design and implementation of the related responses. Now we go then into the last step, which is the design and implementation of the responses. If you go to specifically the ED in terms of the definition of the response, they refer to both policies and procedures. So policies per the definition are statements of what should or should not be done to address an assessed quality risk, whilst procedures are then the actions to implement the policies. Again, there is a very nice schematic presentation within the explanatory memorandum to this ISQM ED, which gives you a little detail in terms of the specific process that you need to follow as a firm. So if we start at the top, As a firm, we first need to establish what is the objective of our firm as a whole, and then break it down into individual objectives of the system of quality management at both the firm level as well as on the engagement level. Once we've done that and we've established individual quality objectives, for each of those quality objectives, we will have a required response to that specific quality objective and the assessed quality risk linked to that quality objective. So again, if you remember when we looked at and we talked about the quality objectives, you will have certain required responses that is linked to the 7 components for which we have the required quality objectives. And then secondly, for those additional quality objectives that you've identified, you will have then specific responses to address those quality objectives and the risks attached to that. All right, so that is then the 3 steps of your risk assessment process. In addition to the 3 steps, the ED also contains some paragraphs around what happens if you identify any changes. So in paragraph 31, and I'm reading from the statement directly, the firm shall identify changes in the nature and circumstances of the firm or its engagements and modify the quality objectives, the quality risks, or the responses as appropriate in response to such changes. Contained in the ED is also some detail in terms of what the situations are that result in these changes. So these changes can result as a result of information arising from the firm's monitoring activities. So let's take, for example, a firm that has an internal monitoring review system. And as part of that internal monitoring review system, they've identified certain risks that hasn't been identified or addressed previously. Those risks will then have to be remediated by certain actions. And that action can be the addition of a further quality objective within your risk assessment process. And then taking that quality objective, identifying and assessing the quality risks around it, and designing specific responses to address it. A second scenario would be where there's any changes in the nature and the circumstances of both the firm as well as any and all individual engagements. And then a last section that is contained regarding risk assessment process within the ED is the requirements around documentation. Paragraph 66 and paragraph 67 contains these requirements, where it specifically relates to the risk assessment process. The firm shall prepare documentation of its system of quality management that is sufficient to support the consistent implementation and operation of the responses, and to provide evidence of the design and implementation and the operation of these responses in such a manner that the firm is able to evaluate the system of quality management from this documentation. Again, the principle of re-performance that we as auditors and assurance practitioners are very much aware of. And then secondly, in paragraph 67, it refers to the fact that the firm shall prepare documentation that includes the firm's quality objectives and assessed quality risks, as well as a description of the responses and how the firm's responses addressed the assessed quality risks. Meaning that, yes, smaller practices might not have an exhaustive risk assessment process documented, but something will have to be documented, if at minimum it is your quality objectives and the required responses to those quality objectives. What the IAASB has also done is they have issued a document containing draft examples of how the nature and circumstances of the firm and the engagements it performs affect the implementation of the proposed ISQM 1. I would suggest that if you have some nighttime reading to do or you don't get to sleep at night, this is a nice document to go and have a read through, as it contains very good examples of how to implement this risk assessment process. I have just looked at one specific scenario out of scenario 2, and we've looked at one specific identified quality risks out of that scenario. So if we go into that detail, in this scenario, it is a small firm that performs compilation and review engagements, which most of our firms does have a section on. Okay, this small firm is a single geographical location firm that performs compilations of financial statements under ISRS 4410 and also reviews financial statements under ISRE 2400, your independent reviews. The firm's clients are local owner-managed businesses operating in industries such as farming, manufacturing and retail. Now, clearly for us as a firm to be able to establish a risk assessment process, we would need to understand the type of engagements that we are involved in. Hence this step of understanding the nature and circumstances of the firm. Once you have obtained that nature and of the circumstances of the firm, you will have to then identify the quality objectives. If we specifically look at this, one of the required quality objectives per the ISQM 1 is the objective of the fact that the firm, its personnel and others subject to relevant ethical requirements must fulfill their responsibilities in relation to these ethical requirements, including those related to independence, specifically referring to paragraph 32B of this ED. So if we break it down and make it specific to this specific firm, which is a smaller environment, the firm, its personnel and others subject to relevant ethical requirements fulfill their responsibilities in relation to independence requirements. And this is then also the quality objective that you will document as part of your quality management process. Once we've established the quality objective, we go into assessing or identifying the quality risks. In identifying the quality risks, again, we need to consider two questions: the likelihood of occurrence of that specific risk, as well as the potential effect of that risk on the achievement of the quality objective. In this specific example, it states that the quality risk here is the fact that personnel and others subject to relevant ethical requirements might not comply with specifically the independence requirements addressing financial interest and loans and guarantees. So what is the likelihood of occurrence? The firm determines that there is a reasonable possibility that a family member of an engagement team member or another individual with whom the engagement team member has a close relationship has such a financial interest in a client or provides a loan or a guarantee. And then very important, why? Because the firm operates in a small town and the family members of the firm's personnel may therefore have financial interest in the firm's clients. And then second question, what is the possible effect of this identified quality risk on the achievement of the quality objective? In this scenario, in this example, the firm has determined that if the quality risk were to occur, it would have a significant impact on the achievement of the quality objective because it would result in a breach of independence requirements. Again, the reason why the determination is there, why it has a significant impact or not. So now we've identified the quality risk. How do we then go about assessing it? It is important that each and every quality risk will have to be assessed in relation to the rest of the identified quality risk within that firm. So the firm will take all of the quality risk into account and assess the identified quality risks by determining the likelihood of occurrence, as we've already discussed. And in identifying the quality risk, the firm has already established that there is a reasonable possibility of the risk occurring. But the assessment of the likelihood of occurrence is a more precise assessment of how probable it is that the quality risk will occur. For example, in this scenario, the firm may determine that this specific quality risk is more likely to occur than a second or a third quality risk. Hence, it will have a significant impact. Now we've identified the quality risks and we have assessed them. The last step is now, what is our response going to be to these identified and assessed quality risks? In our example, there are very good examples in terms of the specific responses. Remember again, in our discussion, we've referred to the fact that there are certain required responses. Those relate to the 7 components, and then we also have the additional responses based on the additional quality objectives. If we look at required responses by the ED and contained in ISQM 1 ED, it is, for example, relating to independence. The firm assigns operational responsibility for compliance with independence requirements to the firm's managing partner. Another response might be that the firm identifies that the only individuals who are expected to comply with the relevant ethical requirements are personnel within the firm. And a final one is that on an annual basis, all personnel are required to submit a written confirmation confirming their independence and the absence of any financial interest or loans or guarantees within any of our the firm's engagements. And then lastly, the example also contains some other responses designed and implemented by the firm. And this is now here where you as a firm need to really go down and tailor and specify your responses. So examples here again would be, because it is a smaller environment, the firm establishes a policy that it will not accept a client that is owned by family members of the firm's personnel. Or they might include a response that says, all personnel will be provided with a PDF copy of the relevant ethical requirements, and training will be provided on an annual basis to all of the firm's personnel to make them aware of what these independence requirements are. So it's clear from this specific example that as a firm, this is your opportunity to really go and tailor your quality management process towards your understanding of your business as a whole, but also towards your understanding of each and every engagement that you have. As part of your nighttime reading, I would like to suggest that you go and have a read through this detailed documentation that the IAASB has prepared in terms of the quality management process and what drives this. So firstly, the reference is made to the IAASB's exposure draft for quality management at both the firm and the engagement level. Here we have 3 EDs. The first one is ISQM 1, then also there's ISQM 2, and then the ED on ISA 220. Further, within ED ISQM 1, what was really helpful for me is to have a look at the application and other explanatory material, as well as Appendix 1 that gives a lot of detail on the individual components. Then also the IAASB's draft frequently asked questions regarding this proposed ISQM 1. And then lastly, as per the scenario that we've discussed, the IAASB's draft examples on how the nature and circumstances of the firm and the engagements it performs affect the implementation of proposed ISQM 1. I hope that my presentation and the recording today shed some light on the risk assessment process and the steps that needs to be followed in terms of implementing it as part of your quality management processes going forward. Thank you.